Mommy's key.
Where did you get that?
That key belonged to the West Wing.
Mommy said it opens the room where.
At the wedding, the maid's daughter dropped an old key, and seconds later the bride froze, not because the key was expensive, not because it sparkled. It was small, rusted, and tied to a faded red ribbon that looked like it had been carried through years of pain, prayers, and secrets. It slipped from the little girl's hand and hit the marble floor with a tiny metallic sound. Click. In a ballroom filled with white roses, crystal chandeliers, and 200 wealthy guests, that sound should have meant nothing. But Savannah Whitmore, the bride, stopped walking down the aisle. Her perfect smile vanished. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet so hard one of the white roses snapped at the stem. And at the altar, billionaire hotel owner Julian Ashford slowly turned his head. The little girl who had dropped the key was only 4 years old, deep brown skin, big tearful eyes, two neat puffed ponytails tied with pink ribbons. She stood beside her mother, a black maid named Naomi Carter, who had been ordered to stay near the back of the room with the rest of the staff. Naomi reached down quickly, trying to pick up the key before anyone noticed. But someone had already noticed. Savannah. And the way the bride stared at that old key was not confusion, it was fear. Then the little girl looked up at Julian and said in the smallest voice, "Mommy said this opens the room where the crying lady lived." The ballroom went silent. The music stopped. Julian's face went pale, because 22 years earlier, his mother had disappeared from the Ashford estate, and the only room in the old West Wing that had stayed locked since that night had a missing key. Stay with this, because that tiny key would stop a wedding, expose a crime hidden inside one of the richest families in Georgia, and reveal why a poor maid had been carrying the truth in her daughter's pocket all along. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we step into the story, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments, because stories like this remind us that truth can hide in the smallest hands, and sometimes the people everyone ignores are the ones carrying the answers. If you're new here, subscribe and stay close, because this is the kind of story that starts with a wedding but ends with a family finally facing what money, silence, and fear tried to bury. The Ashford estate sat on 40 acres outside Savannah, Georgia, surrounded by old oak trees dripping with Spanish moss and iron gates tall enough to make ordinary people feel small before they even reached the driveway. The house itself was almost too beautiful to feel real. White columns, long balconies, wide marble steps, a ballroom with gold-trimmed mirrors, and a ceiling painted with pale blue clouds. People called it Ashford House, but the staff had another name for it: the Quiet Palace. Because even when the mansion was full of people, it never felt alive. It felt watched, preserved, like every room was holding its breath. Julian Ashford had inherited the estate when he was 29, along with the Ashford luxury hotel empire, 5 private resorts, and a fortune built by men who never apologized. By 37, he had doubled the company's value and turned himself into the kind of man who appeared on magazine covers with words like visionary, disciplined, and impossible to read printed under his photograph. He was handsome in a controlled, distant way. Tall, broad-shouldered, always in tailored suits, with dark hair touched slightly at the temples and eyes that rarely gave away what he was feeling. But people who worked inside Ashford House knew something the magazines didn't. Julian did not sleep much. Some nights, long after the guests were gone and the staff had finished polishing the silver, he walked the west hallway alone. He always stopped in front of the locked door at the end, never opened it, never touched it. Just stood there as if listening for something from the past. No one asked him why. In houses like that, staff learned quickly which doors were not meant to be opened. Naomi Carter learned it on her first day. She was 31, a single mother with deep dark skin, tired but steady eyes, and a quiet strength that made people underestimate her until they needed her. She wore the black maid uniform required by the estate, but nothing about her looked small. Life had tried to bend her, but it had not broken her posture. She moved carefully, worked thoroughly, and spoke softly because softness had helped her survive in rooms where power always belonged to someone else. Her daughter, Imani, was 4 years old. Imani was the kind of child who noticed everything adults tried to hide. She noticed when her mother smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. She noticed when the old housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, rubbed her wrist after carrying heavy linen baskets. She noticed Julian standing outside the locked West Wing door at night. And she noticed the old key. It was tied to a red ribbon and kept inside a small cloth pouch Naomi carried beneath her uniform. Naomi almost never took it out. But sometimes, when she thought Imani was asleep, she would sit at the edge of their tiny staff cottage behind the estate, hold that key in her palm, and stare at it like it was both a blessing and a curse. "Mommy," Imani asked once, "what does it open?" Naomi had gone still. "A door," she whispered. What door? Naomi closed her fingers around it, a door that should have been opened a long time ago. That was all she said. But children remember unfinished answers. And no one in that mansion knew that Imani had seen more than anyone realized. Naomi had not planned to work at Ashford House. She had avoided it for years. The name alone made her stomach tighten. But when rent went up, her mother's medicine got expensive and the hotel laundry job cut her hours without warning. She applied through an agency that did not tell her the family name until the placement was already confirmed. Ashford. For 2 days, Naomi considered refusing. Then she looked at Imani sleeping under a thin pink blanket, one little hand resting on the stuffed brown bear she called Mr. Sunday, and she said yes. Because mothers do not always get to choose the places that hurt them. Sometimes they walk right back into the fire because their child needs food. From the first week, Naomi kept her head down. She cleaned guest rooms, polished glass, changed flowers, took instructions from Mrs. Bell, and avoided the West Wing whenever possible. Julian saw her often, but in the way rich men see staff. Not cruelly, not kindly. Briefly, a nod, a thank you. Briefly, a nod, a thank you, a passing glance. Until the morning he found Imani sitting outside the library, crying quietly because Mr. Sunday had lost one button eye. Julian stopped mid-step. Naomi came rushing around the corner, panic on her face. Mr. Ashford, I'm sorry. She knows not to sit here. I just turned away for 1 minute. Julian looked down at the little girl. What happened to him? Imani sniffed and held up the bear. He can't see Sunday anymore. Julian crouched slowly, expensive suit and all, until he was level with her. Is Sunday his favorite day? Imani nodded. Because pancakes? Something changed in Julian's face. Not much. Just enough for Naomi to notice. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small travel sewing kit, the kind hotel owners carried without thinking because emergencies were always someone's job. He opened it, found black thread, and spent 5 silent minutes sewing the button eye back onto Mr. Sunday while Imani watched like he was performing surgery. When he finished, she took the bear back and studied the repair. You fixed him, she said. Julian nodded. I tried. You look sad too, Imani said. Naomi closed her eyes. Imani. But Julian did not seem offended. He looked at the child for a long moment. Maybe I need a button too. Imani considered this seriously. Mommy has a key. Keys fix doors. Naomi's breath caught. Julian looked up at her. For 1 second, the hallway seemed to tilt. Then Naomi gently took Imani's hand and said, We should go. Julian let them. But after that, he noticed them. He noticed Imani's careful silence. He noticed Imani's old soul eyes. He noticed the way the child always looked toward the West Wing, as if she could hear a story calling from behind the locked door. And the truth was already in the house. They just hadn't seen it yet. Savannah Whitmore entered the estate like a woman walking into a portrait she intended to own. She was 28, fair-skinned, elegant, with honey blonde hair styled in soft waves and a smile so polished it felt expensive. Her family came from old Southern money, the kind that had lost some of its actual fortune but kept all of its pride. Marrying Julian Ashford would restore everything her family pretended they had never lost. In public, Savannah was charming. She touched Julian's arm lightly when photographers were near. She called Mrs. Bell dear. She complimented the flowers. She laughed softly at jokes from board members and kissed the cheeks of women she secretly despised. But Naomi saw the difference when no guests were watching. Savannah's eyes measured people. Useful, useless, threat, invisible. Naomi fell into the last category at first. Until Savannah saw the key. It happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Naomi was helping prepare the bridal suite when Imani wandered in holding Mr. Sunday, humming softly. She was not supposed to be there, but Mrs. Bell had asked Naomi to bring fresh towels, and the child had followed. Savannah stood in front of the mirror wearing a silk robe, examining a diamond necklace against her throat. Her eyes shifted to Imani. What is that child doing here? Naomi straightened. I'm sorry, ma'am. She'll wait outside. Savannah's gaze dropped to Imani's hand. The red ribbon. The old key had slipped from the pouch in Naomi's apron, and Imani was holding it. Savannah's face changed so quickly most people would have missed it. Naomi did not. Fear first, then anger, then control. Savannah stepped closer. Where did you get that? Imani held it against her chest. Mommy's. Savannah looked at Naomi. That's a filthy old thing. Why are you carrying trash around my wedding suite? Naomi reached for it. It's personal. Savannah smiled. Nothing carried by staff inside this house is personal unless I allow it to be. Naomi lowered her voice. Please don't speak to my daughter like that. The room chilled. Savannah blinked slowly as if surprised the maid had a voice. Be careful, she said. Women in your position should know the difference between pride and employment. Naomi took the key from Imani and tucked it away with trembling fingers. But Imani had already seen Savannah's face. That night she whispered, Mommy, the bride got scared of your key. Naomi pulled her close and said nothing. Because how do you explain to a 4-year-old that fear can be proof? The first real humiliation came 4 days before the wedding. The estate was full of planners, florists, caterers, and Savannah's bridesmaids. Naomi had been assigned to the bridal breakfast, serving fruit, pastries, and coffee on the east veranda. Imani sat just inside the kitchen doorway with Mr. Sunday and a small coloring book. Savannah's younger cousin Elise noticed the child and smiled. She's adorable. What's your name? Before Imani could answer, Savannah said, Don't encourage her. Staff children start thinking they're guests if you speak to them too sweetly. The bridesmaids laughed softly, not because it was funny, because Savannah had money and people laughed differently around money. Naomi's hands tightened around the coffee pot. Imani lowered her eyes. Savannah continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. Honestly, Naomi, it's generous enough that Julian allows her on the property. On my wedding day, I don't want her seen. Is that understood? Naomi swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Imani looked up. I can be invisible. The veranda went quiet for half a second. Savannah smiled. Good. Practice. Naomi felt something inside her crack, but she did not speak. She could not afford to. She had a daughter to feed, a mother to help, and a secret that had already cost too much. But the toddler had already seen something she was never supposed to see. Later that afternoon, Imani followed Mr. Sunday's missing ribbon into the west hallway and saw Savannah speaking with an older man Naomi did not recognize. They stood near the locked door. Savannah held a folded paper and whispered angrily. My grandmother said the key was destroyed, Savannah said. If that maid has it, then someone lied. The man's voice was low. Then get it before the ceremony. If that room opens, the Ashford name won't be the only one ruined. Imani did not understand everything, but she understood one thing. The bride wanted Mommy's key. The wedding day arrived warm and bright, with white roses covering the estate like snow that had learned how to bloom. By 10 in the morning, luxury cars filled the driveway. Photographers moved across the lawn. Violinists tuned beneath the veranda. The ballroom had been transformed into a dream of candles, silk, and gold. Every chair was wrapped in ivory ribbon. Every table glittered. Every guest seemed dressed not just to attend a wedding, but to be seen attending it. Naomi had begged Mrs. Bell to let her stay in the kitchen that day, but Savannah had personally requested her for ballroom service. I want the staff who know the house best, Savannah said sweetly. Naomi understood the message. I want you where I can watch you. Imani was told to stay in the small staff room behind the kitchen. Naomi gave her crackers, juice, and Mr. Sunday. No wandering, Naomi whispered, kneeling in front of her. Imani nodded. Even if the bride gets scared, Naomi touched her face. Especially then. But just before the ceremony, Mrs. Bell came rushing into the staff room. Naomi, they need you in the bridal hall. Naomi hesitated. I'm Mani. I'll watch her, Mrs. Bell said. But Mrs. Bell was called away 2 minutes later by a florist whose centerpiece had collapsed. And Imani, 4 years old, saw Savannah's cousin Elise hurry past the door with the red ribbon in her hand, the red ribbon tied to the key. Mommy's key, Imani whispered. She followed. Through the service hallway, past the kitchen, around the back of the ballroom. She found the key lying near the aisle as if someone had dropped it or thrown it there in panic. Imani picked it up just as the wedding march began. The ballroom doors opened. Guests rose. Savannah appeared in a white gown covered in pearls, her veil floating behind her like mist. She looked perfect. Untouchable. Beautiful enough to make people forget to question her. Julian stood at the altar in a black tuxedo, face controlled, eyes distant. Naomi stood near the back wall holding a tray she no longer remembered picking up. Then Imani stepped from the side aisle, clutching Mr. Sunday in one arm and the old key in the other. Savannah saw her. The bride's face hardened. What are you doing? She hissed under the music. Imani froze. Several guests turned. Naomi's heart stopped. I found Mommy's key, Imani whispered. Savannah moved fast, too fast. She grabbed the child's wrist and tried to pull the key from her hand. Give that to me, Imani whimpered. No, it's Mommy's. The music faltered. Naomi ran forward. Don't touch her. Savannah looked up, furious that the maid had spoken in front of everyone. Control your child. Then she yanked. Imani stumbled. Mr. Sunday fell. The key slipped from her fingers and struck the marble floor. Click. It landed in the center of the aisle between the bride and the altar. Such a tiny sound. But Savannah froze like someone had fired a gun. Julian's eyes dropped to the floor. The old key lay there, tied to its faded red ribbon. He took one step forward. Where did you get that? Naomi could not breathe. Savannah recovered first. It's nothing. Some old service key. Remove them. That Mani, frightened and honest, looked at Julian and said the words that changed everything. Mommy said this opens the room where the crying lady lived. The ballroom went silent. Julian stared at the child. What did you say? Imani's lips trembled. The crying lady. Mommy cries when she holds it. Every eye turned to Naomi. Savannah's voice sharpened. She's making things up. She's a child. Julian bent down and picked up the key. His hand shook once before he steadied it. Naomi saw recognition move across his face. Not complete, but enough. This key, he said slowly, belonged to the West Wing. Savannah whispered, Julian, this is not the time. He looked at her. For the first time that day, the groom did not look like a groom. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a grave that had just opened. Naomi, he said, tell me what this is. Naomi's eyes filled. For years, she had rehearsed silence. She had built her life around it. Silence kept her mother safe. Silence kept her mother safe. Silence kept her employed. But silence had also protected the wrong people. My grandmother worked here, Naomi said, voice shaking. Her name was Lillian Carter. Julian went still. Mrs. Bell gasped softly from the back of the room. Naomi continued. She was your mother's personal maid. The room seemed to tilt. Julian's mother, Vivian Ashford, had vanished when Julian was 15. The official story was that she had left the estate after a breakdown, abandoned her family, and disappeared overseas. Julian's father had repeated that version until the day he died. The newspapers had whispered. Society had judged. And Julian had spent 22 years believing his mother chose to leave him. Naomi looked at the locked west hallway beyond the ballroom doors. My grandmother never believed she left. Savannah's bouquet trembled in her hands. Here is what nobody knew. Lillian Carter had been with Vivian Ashford on the last night anyone saw her. Vivian had been frightened. She had packed a small bag. She had given Lillian a key and begged her to keep it hidden. If anything happens to me, Vivian had whispered, this opens the West Room. The truth is inside. But before Lillian could help her, the estate erupted. Julian's father, Richard Ashford, ordered staff dismissed. Lillian was accused of theft and fired before sunrise. Vivian disappeared that same night. Lillian tried to go to the police. No one believed a black maid over one of the richest men in Georgia. So she kept the key. She passed it to Naomi's mother. Naomi's mother passed it to Naomi. And for years, that old key lived in silence, waiting for someone powerful enough to open the door. Julian's voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't your grandmother come back? Naomi wiped her cheek. She did, twice. Your father's lawyers threatened her. Then she got sick. Before she died, she told me if I ever worked near this family, I had to find out if the door still existed. Julian looked at Savannah. Why are you afraid of this key? Savannah laughed, brittle and sharp. I'm not afraid. This is a disgusting interruption. Your maid is using family tragedy to humiliate me. Imani bent down, picked up Mr. Sunday, and whispered, the bride said if the room opens, her grandma gets ruined. Savannah's face lost every bit of color. Julian turned fully toward her. What does your grandmother have to do with my mother? No answer. Mr. Vale, Julian's attorney, stepped from the second row, his expression grave. Julian, before your father married Vivian, he was engaged to Margot Whitmore, Savannah's grandmother. A murmur rippled through the guests. Savannah whispered, stop. Mr. Vale looked at Julian. They were rumors, nothing proven. But Margot remained close to your father's business circle for years. Julian lifted the key. Then we opened the room. Savannah grabbed his arm. No? The word came out like panic. That was all the proof the room needed. The walk to the West Wing felt longer than the aisle. Guests followed at a distance, whispering. Naomi carried Imani, whose face was pressed into her mother's shoulder. Julian walked ahead, key in hand. Savannah followed because not following would have looked like guilt. But every step seemed to drain strength from her. They reached the locked door at the end of the hallway. For 22 years, no one had opened it. Julian stood before it, breathing unevenly. Naomi stepped closer. Mr. Ashford, he looked at her. My grandmother said your mother loved you, she whispered. Whatever is in there, please know that first. Julian closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he put the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened with a soft, aching sound. Inside was not a bedroom anymore. It was a preserved sitting room covered in dust, white sheets over furniture, old perfume in the air, a cracked mirror, a writing desk near the window, and on that desk sat a metal box. Savannah made a sound behind them. Julian crossed the room and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to him. My dearest Julian, his hands began to tremble. He opened the first one. Vivian Ashford's handwriting filled the page. If you are reading this, then someone finally found the courage to open the room your father locked me inside. Naomi covered her mouth. Julian read silently, face breaking in slow motion. The letters told the truth. Vivian had not abandoned him. She had discovered Richard Ashford and Margot Whitmore were moving company assets into private accounts. When she threatened to expose them, Richard declared her unstable, locked her in the West Room for 3 days, then forced her into a private clinic under a false name. Margot had helped arrange it. Savannah's grandmother. The final letter was shorter than the rest. Julian, my beautiful boy, if they tell you I left, know this. I fought to stay. I fought for you. Love does not leave willingly. Sometimes it is taken. Julian sat down hard in the chair. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Savannah spoke. You have to understand, that was decades ago. I had nothing to do with. Julian looked up. But you knew. Savannah's lips parted. You knew enough to be afraid of the key, he said. You knew enough to try to take it from a child. Savannah's composure shattered. My grandmother told me stories, yes, but she said your mother was unstable. She said opening this room would destroy both families. I was protecting us. No, Julian said quietly. You were protecting a lie. Savannah turned on Naomi. And you carried this into my wedding like some kind of revenge. Naomi shook her head. I carried it because my grandmother died begging someone to believe her. Savannah pointed at Amani. That child ruined everything. Julian stood so suddenly the room went silent. Do not speak about her again. Savannah laughed through tears. You are ending our wedding over a maid's old story? Julian held up his mother's letters. I'm ending it because a maid's old story is the truth. Savannah's face twisted. You didn't even know these people existed yesterday. Julian looked at Naomi, then at Imani, who was holding Mr. Sunday against her chest with one hand and wiping her cheek with the other. You didn't need to know who they were, he said, voice low, to treat them like human beings. The wedding ended there, not with shouting, not with shouting. Julian walked back into the ballroom, stood before 200 guests, and told them the ceremony would not continue. He thanked them for coming, then asked them to leave with more dignity than the day had been given. Savannah's family tried to contain the story. They failed. Because truth, once carried by a child into a ballroom, does not return quietly to the dark. In the weeks that followed, Julian reopened the investigation into his mother's disappearance. The private clinic records were found. The hidden transfers were exposed. Margot Whitmore's name appeared exactly where Vivian had said it would. Richard Ashford was dead and could not answer for what he had done, but the lie he built was finally pulled apart. And Naomi Carter was no longer invisible. Julian invited her and Imani to remain at the estate, but not as maid and staff child. Naomi was given a position managing the Ashford family archive, helping organize the documents that would restore Vivian's name. She accepted only after Julian agreed to one condition. No favors, she said. Work. Julian almost smiled. Fair work, fair pay, and respect. His face softened. Always. The West Room changed too. Julian did not seal it again. He opened the windows. Removed the dust sheets, filled it with yellow flowers because Naomi found a line in one of Vivian's letters saying yellow flowers made sadness less arrogant. One afternoon, Imani stood in the doorway holding the old key, now polished but still tied to the red ribbon. Is the crying lady happy now? She asked. Julian knelt beside her. I think she's peaceful. Imani nodded seriously. Mommy says truth opens stuck doors. Julian looked toward Naomi, who was pretending not to listen from the desk. Your mommy is very wise. I know, Imani said. She keeps keys. Months later, Julian created the Lillian Carter Foundation, named after the maid who had protected a truth no one wanted to hear. The foundation provided legal help and emergency support for domestic workers who were ignored, threatened, or silenced by powerful employers. At the opening ceremony, Naomi stood beside Julian holding Imani's hand. There were cameras this time, but Naomi was not holding a tray. She was holding the old key. Julian spoke briefly. His voice shook only once. My mother's truth survived because a woman with no power refused to throw it away. And it reached me because her granddaughter was brave enough to carry it and because a little girl dropped it at exactly the right moment. Imani leaned toward Naomi and whispered, I didn't drop it on purpose. Naomi smiled through tears. Sometimes God uses accidents, baby. Julian heard her and looked down, smiling for real this time. The Ashford estate never became a perfect house. Perfect houses are usually pretending. But it became warmer. The west wing opened. Children from the foundation came for summer lunches on the lawn. Mrs. Bell taught Imani how to make peach biscuits in the kitchen. Julian learned to sit at breakfast without checking his phone. And sometimes, in the late afternoon, he would stand in the west room reading his mother's letters. Not to reopen the wound, but to remember the love that had been stolen from him and returned in pieces. A key. A maid's courage. A child's voice. That is how truth often arrives, not with thunder, not with power. Sometimes it arrives tied to a faded ribbon carried in a little girl's hand, dropped at the worst possible moment in front of people who thought money could control every door. So here is the question this story leaves behind. What truth have you been told is too small to matter? What voice have you ignored because it came from someone without status, without wealth, without a seat at the table? Because sometimes the person standing quietly at the back of the room is carrying the key. Sometimes the child everyone wants hidden is the one who sees clearly. And sometimes the door that scares people most is the one that finally sets a family free. If this story touched your heart, like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more emotional stories about courage, justice, and the quiet truths that change everything. And the next story begins when a billionaire's bride screams, "Don't open that box," but the maid's little boy opens it anyway.